Thanks, guys. I'm Evan Berkowitz, and everywhere you look in pop culture today, you see evidence of what could be less than appropriate romantic undertones. So how can a teenager navigate between what is and isn't okay in the world of high school dating and relationships? To help answer this question, I'm joined by Colleen Armstrong, a youth educator with Reach Beyond Domestic Violence, a Waltham-based organization that helps teens and adults alike start and continue healthy relationships. Colleen Armstrong, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's get right into it. Could you just quickly define in layman's terms high school dating?
Yeah. So we need to get away from thinking about titles, boyfriend, girlfriend, and really be thinking about, am I engaged in a relationship with someone that is intimate on some level, whether that's physical or emotional? Am I caring about them? And how is that making me feel? So moving away from, well, are they your boyfriend and are they your girlfriend, to thinking about how is it that we're actually engaging with each other and what does that mean?
And building off of that, could you quickly define high school dating violence?
Yeah.
And whether it's physical violence or bullying or pressuring?
Yeah. So we want to be looking at, is it a pattern of behavior, right? Is this happening every time we get into a fight? Or is this happening every time my partner wants me to do something? And we want to be looking if this pattern of behavior is about getting and keeping power and control over me. So is it about controlling where I go, who I see? Is it making me feel bad? Or is it being used to manipulate me or make me feel afraid of my partner?
And let's get into something different, a historical shift. You go back 100 years, you go back even less than that, and it was written into the legal code that the man did have a possession of sorts of the woman in the relationship. At what point do we see that shift to today's community where that is frowned upon and seen as a violent behavior?
Yeah, so we start to look really into the civil rights movement and people participating in that, and then coming out of that into the feminist movement around the Equal Rights Amendment into the 60s and 70s. And we start to see from that a conversation shift into, if we're talking about equal rights, we should have equal protection under the law from all sorts of different crimes in the workplace around sexual harassment, on the street around laws around sexual assault, and in our homes. And then what we see in the early 90s is the passage of the Violence Against Women Act for the first time, which was actually really spearheaded by now current Vice President Biden when he was a senator, really thinking about providing support for, it's called the Violence Against Women Act, but really individuals experiencing violence from a partner or within their home.
On that, you mentioned that it's not so much violence against women, but violence against anyone. Do you see, is there a difference? Are men more commonly the abusers and women more commonly not, or is that starting to change?
Yeah, so we definitely know that anyone can experience dating violence. We do know that we see and hear more often about reports of females as victims and males as perpetrators, but what we know is that when we look at the latest Youth Risk Behavior Survey data, we're looking at about 1 in 10 Massachusetts students experiencing physical or sexual violence from a partner.
You mentioned Massachusetts youth. Can we go even more specific into, say, the LGBT community? Are there different risks there? Could you speak on that?
Yeah, so we know that the rate of experiencing dating violence for young people that identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender is about the same. About 1 in 4 individuals will experience violence from a partner in their lifetime.
But that is more than the general population? Yes,
so what we
not?
look at is lifetime. About 1 in 4 women will experience physical or sexual violence from a partner, and about 1 in 7 men will. We don't have great data specifically around teens for that, mainly because the Youth Risk Behavior Survey where we're pulling our data doesn't ask that question, who or what gender was your abuser. But what might be different is my barriers to getting help. Maybe my family doesn't know that I'm out or that I'm having this relationship, and there might be some barriers around that. Or maybe I'm not safe to be out at school. Or maybe because of how we talk about it culturally, I'm not identifying it as abusive because there's not a man and a woman in my relationship.
You mentioned quickly the family. If you see domestic violence in your family between your mother and father, can that make you more prone to be a violent person in relationships or be prone to being the victim?
Yeah, so that's a really tough question because what we see is correlation between witnessing and experiencing violence in the home and violence later on in life. But we're not necessarily looking at causation. We know that plenty of folks who experience violence in their homes grow up to be individuals who have really peaceful, healthy relationships. But what we do know is that experiencing violence in a teen relationship is actually a predictor that you'll experience violence in your adult relationships as well.
Is there a genetic background, a genetic disposition for that, or is it solely because you are seeing it?
Yeah, so that's, we don't really know that, to be completely honest. But what we do know is that, again, we talk about this idea of a cycle of violence, and that it does maybe contribute to people experiencing violence later on in their life, or people being more violent later on in their life, but plenty of people experience or witness violence and then go on to kind of break that cycle. And so we really don't have concrete evidence about that.
We've been speaking about the perpetrator. Is there any disposition in your attitude, in your mannerism, that could make you be the victim more often?
Yeah. So, we can definitely talk around protective factors for a lot of things, that if I'm really plugged in to supportive adults in my life, if I have a strong support system amongst my friends, and if I can start talking about what's going on in my relationship early, before it gets violent, then that's got to have some support for me around that, as opposed to if I'm having to hold on to this and now waiting until there's physical violence to now have to try to talk about it and disclose it.
Getting back to differences between different populations and demographics, are there any racial or religious or socioeconomic differences that you see in dating violence, not just for teenagers?
So dating and domestic violence doesn't discriminate. There's really no noticeable difference between races, between religions, between socioeconomic status, between nationalities that we see. So dating and domestic violence is actually very democratic like that, that there's really no protective factors in terms of where I live, where I go to school, and how much money my family has.
Is it possible that the reason that you see such a small difference, is it possible that that's because the different communities have different definitions of domestic violence? Is it possible that within a certain religion or community, they define what a relationship means very differently? Is that possible?
So I think what we come up with that too is that can actually be used by the abuser. This is what our culture says is okay, or this is what our religion says is okay, that I, as this individual, have the power within it. And what that can then do is present a barrier for the individual who's being abused. Now I can't go talk to my cultural or my religious community about it because I'm hearing in my ear from my abuser that this is what we do, and I have to stay quiet.
Are there any people who might be in this sort of situation but do not see it as abuse because that's what they've been taught?
Yeah, and that definitely comes up with it too, particularly around emotional and verbal abuse. We're really conditioned to look at abuse as a hit, a punch, a slap. But I may not think of it as abuse if I'm getting yelled at, or I'm getting told all the time that I'm not good enough or I'm not smart enough. I may not think of that as abuse.
On a more personal level, what made you want to get into this work with REACH and in this field?
Yeah, so I really enjoy the opportunity to work with young people and really enjoy the opportunity to get to connect with young people on that level, which was a big draw for me to get to spend full time doing that and being engaged and having really great conversations with young people. And then also thinking about the fact that it's really important for me personally that we build towards having a nonviolent and a peaceful society, and that everyone has the right to live in a healthy community, in a healthy and peaceful home, and that this work allows me to be a part of that building of healthy communities and peaceful homes.
And while we're building these healthy communities, peaceful homes, what work is there besides this education aspect? Can this problem be eliminated only from educating, or does there need to be other work done?
So, REACH is an organization, and again, works on multiple levels, that we're working at this level of primary prevention around both education for individual young people and education for communities about how we can be supportive of each other and intervene when we see something happening, and then supports later on down the road, shelter services and community advocacy for folks who are having to experience this within their relationship.
And things besides education that you do include, I believe, a helpline. Could you tell people about that, where they can get help besides just you folks at REACH when they are in these situations or when they think they're seeing these situations around them?
So, identifying who safe people to talk to are, if it's a guidance counselor at school, if it's a friend, if it's a parent, and then also looking towards resources. REACH has a website and a 24-hour hotline, and then also Love is Respect is the National Teen Dating Violence Hotline. They are on a 24/7 hotline. They have help available via chat and via text as well.
And let's hope that this problem can get eradicated as soon as possible.
Great.
Colleen Armstrong, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much.
And more from Wicked Teen when we continue. I'm Evan Berkowitz, and see you next time.
Thanks a lot, Evan. That was really great and really informative. And thank you, Colleen, also. And thank you to Gina and Jess. That's about the end of our show. We had a great show. Just to remind everyone, we've moved to the Boomtown studio. This is the first show of Wicked Teen in Boomtown studio.
In honor of Rex Trailer.
In honor of Rex Trailer, who passed away just shortly ago, a few weeks ago, actually. And I was absolutely shocked. And it's an absolute shame, but we're holding up his legacy. We're standing strong, and it's all perfect, I think. So no better way to end the show. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Julia.
And thanks for watching Wicked Teen. Stay with us next time. Because literally this show, I felt like I asked.
Is for training purposes in TV news education. Some copyrighted material is used and is credited on screen. However, no more was taken than was necessary to tell the story of the event. YBA claims fair use of material.